What you are about to listen has the potential to completely transform your perception of the world and your influence on it. You may have realized that, regardless of what you do, people tend to react in ways that seem inexplicable. Some observe you with respect in silence, others with suspicion, and some more with a hostility that is hidden after a disguised indifference. It is not necessary for your voice or to strive to be noticed. It is not about arrogance or an arrogant attitude. It is something much deeper, something that cannot be hidden or attenuated, and that is precisely the reason why they baffle those around you. Some enter a place and go unnoticed, like small drops that dissolve in the sea without causing alterations. But you are not like that. Your presence is like a force of nature, as a contained storm that agitates the apparent calm of the room. Before continuing, I want to know, have you ever stopped to think about how the energy of people around you can impact your life? Have you realized how often the simple fact of being close to someone can completely change the environment? If you are enjoying this content and you feel identified with this topic, do not forget to like, subscribe to the channel, and share this video. Your support is essential to bring this message to more people who can also benefit from this reflection. And tell me, what city are you seeing us? I would love to know your opinion about how the energy of our environment influences our path. Let's share ideas and experiences on this fascinating topic. When you arrive, something changes, even if you can't control or ask for it. It is something that simply happens. Your energy is like a magnetic field. It attracts and repels at the same time. Not everyone can endure it. Not everyone is prepared for the magnitude of what you project. You have felt that tension in the air before, that subtle discomfort when the atmosphere seems to change around you. It is not that you are aggressive or seek to provoke others, but there is something in you that makes people move, adjust their position, as if something inside them will be activated when you see you. And if you stop to reflect, it is not a fear of you, but towards what you represent, which without saying a word transmitted. In a world where many are protected behind carefully designed masks, your authenticity becomes an awkward reflection for others. That generates discomfort. People do not fear darkness or light. What they fear is to face what they don't want to see. Within you, there is a clarity that exposes those truths that many prefer not to recognize. You don't need to point out anything. You don't need to talk. Your single presence is enough to make many question, and that is the reason you bother so many. While others spend their lives looking to fit, you move with the assurance that you do not need to fit in any mold. You walk without having to ask permission. You exist without justifying you. This simple fact, this attitude, is what worries others. You may have noticed it in the looks that they throw you, in the way they observe you with a mixture of intrigue and fear, as if trying to understand something that they fail to unravel. Perhaps you have felt it in their attempts to subtract importance in those evening comments that disguise a clear discomfort. What you experience is no accident, nor is it something that only happens in your mind. There is something in you that does not go unnoticed, an energy that defies the natural order of any space you occupy. And although you may not understand completely, you feel it intensely. Energy does not deceive. There is something tangible in the environment when you speak, a resonance that stays in the minds of those around you, even much after you have gone. Some interpret it as arrogance, others call it intensity. But what really happens is that what they perceive is the strength of someone who remains firm, who refuses to melt with the crowd. And in a world where many prefer the comfort of the ordinary, this becomes an act of resistance. But here is the contradiction. Although you generate admiration, you will also cause resistance. This is inevitable, because the world is not made for those who refuse to be molded. Society rewards those who follow the current, not those who dare to challenge it. And when you advance with an unwavering conviction, some will see it as a threat, not because you have hurt, but because your mere presence reveals what many try to hide. Have you ever wondered why certain people react negatively towards you without any reason? Why do some feel uncomfortable when you talk to certainty? Why are those who try to tear you down even without having done anything to provoke them? The answer is simple. Because something in you challenges them without having to say a word. It is not an act of confrontation, but of pure existence. You are a mirror where they are reflected, and not everyone is prepared to face what they see. Some will try to subtract importance. They will seek any failure in you to justify their discomfort. They will do their best to sow doubts, to create small cracks in your trust. Not because they really believe in what they say, but because they need to feel that they can balance the balance. Because if you get you to doubt yourself, if you get to make you think that you are not as strong as you think, then they can find comfort in their own mediocrity. But here is the lesson that you should never forget. Light does not need permission to shine. You don't have to apologize by strength, and you don't. Do not apologize for the discomfort you provoke in others. Do not minimize your presence to make others feel more comfortable in their own shadows, because those who are really ready to grow will not flee from the light, but will look for it. And in you will find a fortress that may not even know you had. The real challenge is not that others accept you, nor that the world is accommodated to your energy. The real challenge is not to seek the acceptance of others, but to accept yourself as you are, without hesitation, without apologizing or reducing your essence. The more you fight against your true being, the more difficult your path will be. When trying to fit in a mold that was not designed for you, you will get away from what you really are. Maybe you have already felt that discomfort of not fitting. You may have experienced the pressure of those who want you to be easier to handle, more predictable, more according to what they expect. But that is not your nature. You have not come to this world to be a cut version of yourself. You have not come to walk with your head down just to prevent others from feeling discomfort by the force with which you live. And this is where the big question appears. Are you going to continue forcing yourself to fit into a world that is not made for you? Are you going to continue subtracting power to your presence just not to bother others? Or will you finally accept that the reason why people react so intensely to you is because your energy cannot be ignored? The power you possess cannot be pretended or manufactured. It is the result of your own root, of the scars that you have healed, of the battles that you have fought in silence. Although some perceive it as a threat, others will see it as a lighthouse that guides, because those who are in their own self-discovery process will recognize your strength. The real issue is this: are you going to allow the fear and envy of others to define who you are? Or will you walk with the certainty that, although some do not support it, your presence will always be a reminder of what it means to be authentic? When you accept yourself without fear, without apologies, without a doubt, the world loses its power over you. And it is at that moment when you really discover what it means to be free. Not everyone understands what it means to live without depending on the validation of others. In a society where the majority seeks to define themselves through the look of others, your independence is not only rare, but it dislodges, challenges, and, in many cases, uncomfortable. You are not looking to highlight or impose your presence, but the simple fact of not needing the applause of others makes you a mystery. They observe you with distrust, trying to understand how it is possible that someone does not depend on that validation that for them is as essential as the air. Have you noticed that tension? That way in which some try to test, as if your security were just an illusion that they need to destroy. For them, it cannot be real. They cannot conceive that someone walks with such certainty without depending on the approval of others. And then they try. They look for cracks in your trust. They hope that you will be hesitated to look for their approval as they do with others. But you don't. And that is the true fracture that they cannot understand. In our society, validation has become a currency. It is granted and withdrawn according to convenience, used as a tool to control, to mold, to keep people within the established limits. Those who cling to the need for approval of others live chained without knowing it, always pending a look that approves them, looking for a gesture that indicates that they are on the right path. But those who manage to free themselves from these bonds become unpredictable people. They can no longer be controlled. They can no longer be manipulated with compliments or rejection, and that causes fear. If you look carefully, you will understand how this game works. Since childhood, most people were conditioned to depend on external validation. They grew up believing that their value was determined by the perception of others, in case they were accepted or not, in case they fulfilled the expectations that imposed them. It was not a choice, but a lesson that they were given so that they could survive in a world that requires complying with certain standards. However, there are some who, at some point in his life, wake up. They realize that the validation that comes from others is nothing more than an illusion, a need that is never satisfied, a cycle that only feeds emotional dependence. And at the time they realize, they decide not to continue participating in that game. Maybe you remember that moment you stopped waiting for the world to give you permission to be who you are. It was when you understood that you did not need anyone's approval to travel your own path. It was not an act of rebellion, nor a challenge towards others, but a silent release, a decision made in the depths of your being. And it was at that time that you began to be perceived differently. People who are looking for validation do not know how to handle those who no longer need it. Some feel admiration because inside they want that same freedom, but others, those who have built their identity about the need for acceptance, see it as a threat. Because if you can live without depending on the approval of others, then everything they have believed about themselves begins to stagger. And that is a truth that many are not willing to face. You will have realized that there are people trying to doubt, not because they really believe you are wrong, but because they need to watch you hesitate to confirm their own worldview. If they manage to question, if you get you to look for the same validation that they are looking for, they will feel calm, thinking that no one can escape the rules. But if you do not, if you remain firm in your independence, you force them to face the harsh reality. Freedom is possible, but it requires a price that not everyone is willing to pay. It is not a superficial independence or arrogance that pretends not to need anyone. It is something much deeper. It is not about rejecting the human connection, but not depending on it to define you. Not that you don't care about relationships, you don't use them to validate your own existence. There is a huge difference between enjoying the company of others and feeling that you need that company to know what you are worth. There is something that changes when you stop looking for validation in others. It is a deep transformation that is not seen, but it feels. Suddenly, you are walking without the constant need to be observed, without the obligation to make others approve you. You are no longer waiting for a gesture that confirms to you if you are doing things well, because you have learned to act from your own authenticity, regardless of whether or not. And that authenticity becomes an unwavering power, because when you stop depending on the look of others, you are no longer predictable, you are no longer manipulable. You have freed yourself from the invisible chains that tied many to the opinion of others, and that, of course, generates discomfort in others. Some will see you with admiration because in the depths of their being they would like to be like you, but others will see you as a threat. The reason is simple. What you represent challenges everything they know. If you can exist without the constant need to be approved, then everything they have built on external validation collapses. And that is something that many are not ready to face. What is even more shocking is that when you free yourself, you no longer act to be seen. You no longer adjust your words or your actions to fit into what is expected of you. The world does not define you, and at the same time, you stop defining yourself for what others expect. You become someone who walks with the truth of their being, without fear, without excuses. Of course, There will be those who try to doubt because they cannot understand how someone can live without constantly looking for approval. They will try to make you adapt to their expectations, that you become something more manageable for their own comfort. But it is at that time when you must decide, will you follow the path of adaptation or will you remain faithful to your essence, regardless of what others think? The truth is that when you are in this place of independence, nothing that others say or do can alter you. External validation loses its power because in the end, the only validation that matters is what you give yourself. And that, dear friend, is what marks true freedom, not to depend on what others think to validate your existence. At this point, fear and envy lose their influence on you, because you know that it doesn't matter if others approve or disapprove of your life. You are still who you are, faithful to yourself, and every word you say, every action you take, is filled with a power that only the brave can possess. You do not need to decorate the truth or soften it to be accepted. The truth, in its purest form, is enough. Although many claim to wish the truth, most are not prepared to face it. You may have already noticed it in the discomfort of the looks, in the silences that come after you say something that others prefer to shut up. You are not looking to bother, but the truth by its very nature causes reactions. It's like illuminating a dark room. Some receive that light with relief because they seek clarity in the midst of confusion. But there are those who reject it because what that light reveals is something that they would prefer to continue ignoring. And that is where the bewilderment begins. We live surrounded by empty words, speeches that seek to please, phrases that are said to fit. Most prefer to listen to what they are comfortable for them, what validates them, which allows them to continue without questioning anything. However, you are different. You don't talk to please, you talk to say what it is. And this completely changes the stage. The truth has a weight that some cannot sustain, not because it is destructive, but because it highlights what they try to hide, not only to others, but to themselves. The most dangerous lie is not the one that is pronounced out loud, but that which is repeated in silence, internally, until it becomes part of who we are. And when someone like you appears, someone who is not dragged by the comfort of falsehood, is as if everything they have built about lies began to crumble. They have told you that you are too direct, that your words could soften, that you should think more about how they affect others before expressing them. But what they really want is not that you are more cautious. What they are looking for is that you adapt to their world of half-truths, that you participate in their game where everyone intends to see the obvious. And if you refuse to follow that script, if you speak without filters, you become a threat. And here is the paradox. The ones who feel most attacked by your words are the ones who need to hear them the most. Inside, they know that you are not lying, that what you say has a solid base. But accepting it would mean facing everything they have been avoiding. And not everyone is ready for it. Some react with anger, looking for any excuse to discredit you, to make you seem insensitive or cruel, not because they believe you are unfair, but because they need a reason to ignore what you say. If they accept that what you say is true, they would have to change. And the change is something scary for those who have built their life about denial. Others simply prefer to move away, not because they don't care what you say, but because they care so much that they can't face that truth. What you said was recorded in his mind, like a seed that, although he tried to ignore, began to germinate slowly inside. At first, he was reluctant, trying to convince his mind that it was not important, that he should not give him too much relevance. However, the truth has a peculiar way of resisting oblivion. As a persistent shadow, he expects the precise moment to come to light. Perhaps you have lived a similar situation when someone to whom you revealed an uncomfortable truth was distanced from you, but over time, he returned. He did not do it with words, but with a different look, as if something had changed in his way of seeing the world. Because the truth, when expressed firmly but without aggressiveness, has a transformative power, although at first it is difficult to accept. The question that arises then is, will you continue talking with the same clarity, even if that means bothering others? Will you remain firm in what you think, although that causes some to move away? Or will you give up, softening your words so that the environment is more comfortable? The decision is in your hands. You can adjust what is expected of yourself, be politically correct, and say what others want to hear. But if you do that, you will be betraying what makes you unique. The truth will not always be well received. It will not always be understood, and sometimes it will not be grateful, but it is still fundamental. In a world where most prefer to live surrounded by comfort and half-truths, those who have the courage to face reality and express what others fear are those who really leave a mark in the world. Not everyone can deal with your honesty. Not everyone can receive what you say without feeling attacked. But those who are really willing to grow, those who seek to evolve genuinely, will recognize what you give them. Not because you tell them what they want to hear, but because you give them what they really need. And that's when everything makes sense. Because what really matters is not how many move away, but how many wake up to a new understanding. We live in a world full of invisible forces that seek to keep people within the limits of the predictable, where nothing escapes control. From the beginning, the rules have been clear. We are told how to act, what to think, and how far we can get with our dreams before they become a threat. Those who follow the path marked rarely find obstacles. They flow within the system without causing problems, without awakening suspicions, without causing negative reactions. But those who refuse to be molded, those who remain firm at what is established, become something different, something that others cannot control, something they fear. There are forces that try to submit what they cannot master. It is not always so obvious. It is not always a direct confrontation. Sometimes everything disguises itself as well. Intentioned advice, apparently sincere concerns, attempts to sow doubt. But behind each kind word, of each seemingly harmless warning, there is a hidden message. Adapt. Be more flexible. Do not challenge what is already established. It is no accident. It is the natural reaction of a world that does not know how to handle those who do not fit their standards. Some people have learned to read between the lines, to detect what is not said, to understand what is hidden behind everyday words. Some have reached a level of consciousness such that they no longer fall into the traps of manipulation, since they have managed to see the structure from an external perspective. They have felt the weight of the expectations that have been imposed on them, but never allowed these expectations to catch them, and therefore they are often perceived as a threat. Because someone who cannot be manipulated is someone who does not let themselves control. You may have noticed how certain individuals react when their tactics have no effect on you. His face is filled with bewilderment when his attempts to influence your behavior collapse, not getting the reaction they expected. Frustration hides behind a feigned indifference, seeing that their attempts to make you doubt fail to touch an apex of your inner peace. It is not a matter of arrogance. It is simply the result of having built an inner strength so firm that nothing abroad can tear it down. The fear you provoke in others has nothing to do with you, but with what you represent. You represent the possibility of others like you who do not give in to manipulation. You represent the idea that the system is not as invulnerable as they have been believed. Every time you challenge the unwritten rules, every time you refuse to be manipulated, dismantle them the illusion of those who have been trapped in that same lie. And for some, it is unbearable. Manipulation is not always shown directly. Sometimes it is presented as a seemingly harmless halago, seeking to make your guard down, to open a little more. Other times, he disguises himself as subtle criticism, with the intention of sowing doubts about whether you are really on the right path. But when you have learned to recognize the patterns, when you have identified the invisible forces that guide people, you stop falling into their games. And that is one of the reasons why those who base their lives on the control of others fear people like you. It is easy to see their reactions. Some will insist, they will redouble their efforts, they will seek a fissure in your strength. Others, realizing that they cannot touch you, simply move away. They will seek excuses not to face the truth. They have no power over you. And in both cases, discomfort is palpable, because the existence of someone who cannot be manipulated means that freedom is possible. And that possibility is unbearable for those who have lived convinced that they must always play under the rules of others. It is not easy to navigate in a world where invisible pressures try to mold you. Sometimes the temptation to adjust to what is expected of you seems the easiest option. But every time someone yields, it becomes a piece of a gear, loses a part of its essence, and begins to reflect what others wanted it to be. And that is where many are lost, trapped without knowing it in the conformity cycle. Sometimes the real test is not found in obvious manipulations, but in those little gestures that, almost without realizing, seek to influence our decisions. Those soft suggestions that try to convince us that perhaps it would be better to give up, be more accessible, more complicating, those comments disguised as good advice, which in the end try to redirect ourselves without noticing the trap. But once it has been awakened, when the system has been understood, there is no reversal. It is no longer possible to ignore what remained hidden before. Those who have gone through the melting pot, who have learned to see without the filters that others want to impose, understand that their path is unique. They do not seek the approval of those who feel comfortable manipulating. They do not seek to be part of dynamics that hide control under the appearance of cooperation. They do not fall into the invisible traps of those who only know how to move from a position of power. There is a fundamental difference between adapting and losing our authenticity. Those who have found their true voice know when it is necessary to be cunning, but without compromising what they really are. It is not about rejecting each interaction, but knowing how to identify when a relationship hides a hidden intention of control. Few develop this ability because it requires seeing beyond words and appearances. It is to understand the true intentions that are hidden behind each action, capture what is not said, which is wrapped in a courtesy facade. Those who are not manipulated become an uncomfortable presence for those who base their lives on influencing others. Not because they look for the conflict, but because without saying a word, they expose what others try to hide. The simple presence of someone who does not play according to the established rules is enough to change the course of the situation. It is enough to be there for the invisible to become evident. Some try to find an explanation to what they do not understand. They try to put tags, what they cannot classify, looking for a way to fit what they find strange, too distant, too serious, too rigid. But those labels are nothing more than attempts to reduce something that they cannot control. They are attempts to recover the control that escapes them by meeting someone who does not follow the script they expected. The world is not designed for those who have learned to see beyond illusion. However, that does not mean that they should hide. On the contrary, they must remain firm without giving in, because his responsibility is to be the reminder that true freedom is priceless. If there are no people who remain firm in their principles, the world would become a place where everything could be molded and controlled. The choice is always before us. Opt for the easy, along the way in which we barely give in, where we adjust our essence to avoid conflicts, or decide to walk with the firm conviction that there is no price that is worth losing the most important, being oneself without adaptations or concessions. And the question is floating in the air: what way will you choose? The answers are not always found in what people say, but in gestures, in the looks that try to hide what they really feel, that fleeting expression in his eyes, that rigidity in his movements, that little delay in his smile when they see you arrive. Everything reveals more than they pronounce with words. In each meeting, there is an invisible burden, something that you project unintentionally on others. You become a mirror that reflects what they could be, but they have not had the courage to become. However, not everyone is willing to see that image. Some observe you with admiration in silence, wondering how you manage to maintain that strength without breaking. They question how you walk with that security that does not depend on the validation of others. Others, on the contrary, feel an awkward stab, a tension that cannot explain well. Not because you have hurt them, but because in the depths they see themselves in you and do not like what they discover. They face their own fears, the excuses that have postponed, everything they have tried to hide, waiting for it to disappear over time. But there are you, firm, without apologizing for your existence, demonstrating that what they thought were impossible was nothing more than a choice. The human being is complex. Admire what envies, despises what you want secret. You can yearn for the best for others, and at the same time feel deep discomfort to see how those others get it. Not everyone knows how to handle those emotions. Not everyone has the ability to recognize that what bothers you of you is, in reality, a reflection of their own limitations. Some will find a source of inspiration on your way. Others will prefer to attack you in silence, disguising their discomfort with indifference, distancing and words that try to sow doubts about you. But that is not something you should worry about. You cannot be responsible for how others react to your presence. You don't have to reduce yourself to make your reflection more comfortable. You cannot pretend to be someone else, be less than you are, just because some do not know how to deal with the image you return. You have traveled a long and hard way here. You have faced shadows that others did not even dare to look. You have broken invisible chains that they didn't even know they were carrying. And now you find yourself here, firm and unstoppable, being a living testimony that for those who dare to choose, true freedom is not an illusion, but a decision. From the moment you decide to be yourself, something is triggered in those around you. It is fascinating how some people react, some looking for failures in you, others leaving subtle comments that seem harmless, but are loaded with judgment and criticism. Some avoid you without clear reason, avoiding looking at you and little by little disappearing from your life without ever understanding why. If you decided to ask them, your answer would be simple: nothing. All you did was exist as you are, and that, for many, is too much. You cannot control the way they perceive you. You cannot soften the impact of your light on those who are still trapped in the dark. Try to do as if you will not notice, ignore the tension you believe in some. Do not change reality. You know it, even if you tried to deny it. Those looks, those rigid attitudes, speak to you without the need for words. What seemed natural now becomes a signal game that you know how to read instantly. Some see you as a source of inspiration, while others, for some reason, perceive you as a silent threat. This is where the paradox arises. Those who try to distance themselves most are those who, deep down, need what you represent. The discomfort they feel is not for you, but for what your existence forces them to face themselves, something that maybe are not yet ready to see. Even if they move away, even if they seek to discredit you, there is something in them that cannot stop observing you. They are attracted to what they reject, by that force they do not understand. In some corner of his being, there is a desire to wake up, but not everyone is prepared to do so. There will be those who spend their whole life dodging that challenge, seeking refuge in places where they do not have to face what they see inside. But others, over time, will understand, and when they do, they will remember the image you left them, the feeling of having felt small, not because you have diminished them, but because they never learned to expand. At that time, if they choose the path of growth, your reflection will no longer be a threat, but a guide that leads them to their own transformation. However, your purpose is not to change others. You are not here to convince anyone to see something that is not prepared to be understood. Your mission is to continue advancing, challenge your own limits, expand your being without worrying about how others receive it. You cannot wait for others to follow you or reduce you to make the process easier. Life goes ahead, and those who are ready will walk next to you. Those who are not staying behind, trapped in their own limitations. It is not your work to knock down those barriers. It is not your responsibility to load with the weight of its resistance. All you can do is move on without fear, without apologies, without looking back. On that tour, those who are really prepared will see in you the signal they had been waiting for, because true growth does not occur in comfort, but in discomfort, in the confrontation with what had been evaded, in the decision to stop hiding after excuses, and finally accept that the only real barrier has been within each one. The issue continues to float in the air. Are you going to continue advancing with the same certainty without allowing the envy or fear of others to divert you? Or will you let the foreign reaction determine your path? That answer defines much more than you think. Define if you are really free, or if, without realizing it, you continue to allow the world to set limits to what you can become. You don't need to do anything for your energy to be perceived. You do not have to raise your voice, impose, or look for attention. There is something in you that cannot be ignored, a force that feels before you say a single word. It's not about how you walk or how you look at others, but about everything you carry inside. The determination that radiates from each of your gestures, the depth of your gaze, the intensity with which you simply exist. Some people are attracted to that energy. Others, on the contrary, do not know how to handle it. They feel uncomfortable, although they can't understand why. Not because you are a real threat, but because you remind them of something that they have been avoiding for some time. They observe you and, unintentionally, face their own lack of direction, their insecurities, to the parties of themselves who have not yet discovered. In a world where most have learned to dilute to fit, someone who shines naturally becomes a contrast too evident. It is a weight that you have always felt, that feeling that, even in silence, there are those who perceive you as a contained storm. Some feel comfortable around you because they see in you something they have been looking for inside. But there are also the others, those who try to ignore you, minimize your presence, subtract importance, simply because it makes them feel too exposed. It is not about arrogance or superiority. It is something much more subtle, deeper. You cannot hide it or soften it, because it is not something you do, but something you are, and not everyone can endure it. Not everyone is ready to face the intensity of someone who is not afraid to be completely authentic. There are those who prefer to surround themselves with the predictable, of what does not challenge them, of which does not force them to question anything, because comfort is addictive, and your mere existence interrupts that lethargy. You have noticed how some react strangely when you enter a room. You cannot explain it with exact words, but you feel it in the air, how certain conversations stop or change course, how some seem more aware of themselves when you are close. Not because you judge them or because you do something intentionally, but because in you they see something that reminds them of everything they could be if they stopped. It is the difference between those who have learned to live in their possession and those who still prefer to give it up, among those who have faced their shadows and those who continue to flee from them, among those who are ready to grow and those who prefer to stay in the same place without risks, without confrontations, without that discomfort that implies evolving. Many believe that energy is measured by the intensity of what is said, by the force of gestures, or by the size of the actions. However, reality is different. True strength does not need evidence, does not require ornaments or great demonstrations. It is simply perceived. It is transmitted in each breath, in each pause, at every moment of total presence. It is no coincidence that some people feel the need to lower you, not because you have done something to deserve it, but because there are those who cannot support the existence of someone who does not need external approval to know who he is. Inside, if you can be like that, they feel they could too, and that thought is too uncomfortable for many. But here is the real question. Are you going to stop for that? Are you going to soften so that others feel comfortable? Are you going to reduce yourself so as not to alter the safety of those who prefer to stay in their comfort zone? Because if you do, you will be betraying everything that has taken you here. The energy you carry with you is not the result of chance. It did not arise from nothing. It has been forged through each challenge, every choice, every internal battle that you have fought in silence. It has been sculpted by all the times you had to get up for yourself, for all the occasions when you faced the uncertainty guided only by your intuition. You don't have to hide it or justify it. It's your essence. And if some cannot bear it, it is a problem of them, not yours. There is no need to explain what you are. There is no reason to convince anyone that your energy is not a threat. Those who are ready to receive what you represent will, and those who are not will find excuses to avoid it. But in none of the cases it depends on you. You have come here because you learned to move without fear, without waiting for the world to give you permission to be who you are. And that is what really bothers some. They cannot understand how someone can exist with such certainty in a world that seeks to sow doubts. They cannot accept that someone walks with confidence without constant validation. They cannot endure the idea that there are those who have found their own way while they are still trapped in labyrinths, who did not even choose. But none of that is your responsibility. You cannot load with the insecurities of others. You cannot carry the weight of those who have not yet discovered their own strength. Everyone has their process. Each one decides when to wake up, when to face what he has been avoiding, when to take the reins of his own life. All you can do is move on without apologies, without going back, without reducing you to fit the limited vision of those who still cannot see you clearly. Not because you are better than them, but because each one must walk at their own pace. And you simply have decided not to be waiting. So keep up. Keep with the same certainty with which you started this trip, still without fear of the discomfort you generate, without guilt for the energy you carry with you. Because what really bothers others is not what you do, but what you are. And that, deep down, is the clearest sign that you were ever destined to be like others. What do you think we are talking today? Have the energy of the people around you influenced your path so much? Sometimes a simple presence can change everything, right? Have you lived any situation in which someone, without saying a word, made you reflect on your own decisions and attitudes? Or maybe have you felt that your energy has affected the environment and the people around you? Share it in the comments. I would love to know. Before you go, take the opportunity to subscribe to the channel if you have not yet done so. Give him a like to help us continue creating content like this. And if you know someone who has also felt that energy really makes a difference, share the video with him or her. And tell me, where are you from? What city are you seeing us? We are going to connect even more. Maybe you find people with stories similar to yours here in the comments.